We are with Professor Avram Ehrlich. Sessions in the weekly reading, Exodus 1 to 6, a Semitic Heritage Project.
Exodus is the penultimate meeting point of man and God, where Moses, the great lawgiver and prophet and the axes of monotheistic civilization, comes face to face with the great analogy of the Bible, the burning bush, where God's name is embedded in the analogy, where God meets Moses and commands Moses to go and have an intervention, a social intervention, the first social intervention of the Bible, where he commands a former leader of a country to return to his country and intervene using a greater power than he had until then. And that power is in discussion here. Now Moses was keeping the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the farthest end of the wilderness and came to the mountain of God unto Horeb. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside now, and see this great sight, why the bush is not burnt. And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called unto him out of the midst of the bush, and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here am I. This is a crescendo of the ultimate meeting of man and God, and the description that God gives of himself to mankind. And here, this will be an axis for the monotheistic faith for thousands of years to follow, where God refers to himself in an allegorical form as a power that can burn but will never be consumed. Now the question is, to every allegory there is something that is referred to. And what, in the likes of what we know, can be referred to something that can burn and is not consumed? That had not yet been discovered even by the mighty pharaohs. Moses, an educated engineer, mathematician, master of the sciences of the Empire of Egypt, citizen number one in line to the succession, who had escaped and possibly even saved the life of his dynasty by escaping when he was informed that the pharaoh that he had known had been overthrown. And he had become a shepherd to a high priest of Midian. Midian, which is said to be the Medina of Saudi Arabia. So in fact this is a theology of the region, the high priest of Midian, who consulted with Moses. But the Jewish midrashic sources have it that Joseph himself had also been married to the daughter of the high priest of Egypt, and that they were the very same high priests of Midian, of a former era, which had been exiled, had been thrown out of power. And in fact, Jethro, of the same family of those high priests, the same school, the intellectual school, which had passed from generation to generation. It was Jethro who had informed Moses of his heritage, of the Josephite heritage, and of the heritage of the Josephite ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and his father Jacob. The experience in Midian was formative for Moses, and there is no place for one to have a truly mystical and and remarkable experience as the Sinai Desert, then as is now. And Moses was on the path between two mighty civilizations and on the King's Road, and spent 40 years planning what it seems already in the text that we have here are the kernels of a mighty exodus in which he is going to master plan a series of steps using design and pre-thought and cunning, all that he had learned in the schools of Egypt against the taskmasters, using what he seems to have discovered in his time in the desert, a remarkable technology which is going to be revealed here in the form of the burning bush. There are so many opinions what the burning bush could be. However, the context of it seems to show that it is an analogy, but actually an analogy to words. This very book in English is called Exodus, but in the Hebrew it's called names, because the entire structure of the book is about measurements and names and genealogies. And here the references in this chapter is about names and about subcomponents of names, which in the English is not clear, but in the Hebrew becomes very clear. The letters et and ot are both signs or wonders. The wonders that Moses, the miracles that Moses carried out before the Pharaoh. But the same means the letter of a word. And here there seems to be a transition where the acts of almost witchcraft that were performed by Moses, that Moses was told to perform to the Pharaoh, to turn his staff into a snake and to turn his hand into a hand of leprosy to white. These are the symbols of a language of the ancient empires. The staff was the signature and of the tribes and of the patriarch and of debt and of release, whilst the hand was a demonstration of order and of command and also of language, of the hieroglyphic language. So these were demonstrated in analegoric forms to be manipulated or be changed or to have lost their meaning or to have lost their form or to be maneuvered or outmaneuvered by a new form. The name of God, again a name. But this name could be conjugated into the past, the present, and the future. So in effect, it was a form of literary socio-mathematics where the conception of the future could be brought in a verb, and language could have multiple combinations to mean different things. Before we had that capacity for language, the complexity of thought was much more limited. So, in fact, what was being shown here was the capacity of the verb to conjugate, to change form, and to create meaning. And this is a repetition of a similar theme which exists throughout the whole Bible, that words are at the source of meaning. And as it was shown in the book of Genesis, is being shown here, that Moses, through the act of enunciating and demonstrating the meaning of God's name in a social operation of freedom, he was going to demonstrate the power of the word. In these 2 sentences, some interesting issues are revealed. I am the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Indeed. In what way was this a Canaanite idea is not exactly sure. It certainly was from Midian. But Moses seems to be taking an ideology that he discovered as a fusion of Egyptian empire ideology, slave ideology, and this ideology from the desert, this linguistic ideology, and connected to his own heritage, or what may have been perceived as his heritage. He brought it all together, and he creates a new name for God. And he says, what was the God El Shaddai of your ancestors is now the new God, the God of linguistics, the God, the ineffable, the tetragrammaton, the Yud-Hey, Vav-Hey, the name of past, present, and future. I am who I am, which is now going to affect and manifest in a social, political construct of freedom of a nation to their homeland. The marriage of an identity, a biological identity, with an ideological assertion of freedom from bondage was a very important application for a person with the skills such as Moses. It seems that there must have been a genuine intellectual change occurring that we may not be aware of. It seems to come in concert with the transition of language. And at this period of time, the region was going through a genuine, major technological transition between hieroglyphics and idea forms from Egypt to Mesopotamia towards the alphabet. That until and at the 11th century, the alphabet was demonstrated to be far more effective than the greatest tool that the mighty pharaohs had. And it engulfed the entire future civilizations of the entire world, excluding Asia. The alphabetical revolution seems to be the very reference which has been made here to the fire that could not be extinguished and the name of God, I am that I am, which is in fact the instruments, the grammatical instruments in which a word or a name or a noun can change form from past to present to future and can be conjugated in 7 different ways. And given that complexity, the ability to plan and the ability to store and to create different psychological states and different preparatory states, different states of mind, were all demonstrated in the biblical story. The first complex novel, the first part of fiction, stroke instruction manual, stroke chronology, stroke history, stroke storage room details, and stroke genealogies, and stroke mathematics and intercalation of the calendars. This was all stored through the structure of names. So when Moses was coming and standing for the mighty Pharaoh, he had a determination that he had a power in his hand that could overturn the might of the pharaohs. What I find encouraging about the biblical story is that in the narrative it shows that Moses instructs the children of Israel to borrow the valuable vases and possessions of the Egyptians who lived in the same houses, and therefore to steal and to take advantage. Actually, the term natzel is to make a shadow of the Egyptians, that they were going to take all the wealth of the Egyptians with them when they left, and this was part of the structure, because Moses already says in advance that he knows that the Egyptian Pharaoh will not agree to let them go. So he was anticipating a series of royal protocols that would disallow any chance for compromise, and in such a way a series of events, a domino effect, would be caused and would be created. It shows them the mastery of circumstance, a formalization of political maneuvering that Moses was demonstrating his mastery of. And so much so that every household would give to their escaping workers, and every household would feel the impact that their slavery had, and that compensation had been made. So this chapter of the Book of Names summarizes the name of God and what the name of God means in reference to a social imperative. And it reflects the story going onwards, that God imputed social justice. When we talk about the name of the book of Exodus, the book of Shemot, one sees that the name Shemot is at the foundation of the Semitic heritage. That in fact the Semite was not a national group, but rather a group of people that adhered to the idea of names. They were a literary society, and that Moses, more than a biological position, was stating an intellectual philosophic position of the function of grammar in the exercising of human reason, and a construct in which the future can be constructed in a organized, in a predictable, in a beneficial manner, a form of protocol over time, where structures can be measured not in terms of infinite, or not in terms of revolution, but in terms of justice and in terms of law. And he was constructing this on the basis of the name, and the altar of this construct was the analogy of the burning bush, which is at the center of this chapter and the formation of the chapters still to follow.